and welcome to the Priestess Mercury podcast. I'm your co-host, Matt Treese with In Transit Astrology, and with me, as always, is Michelle Bloom with Michelle Bloom Counseling. Michelle, you want to say hi?
Hello.
And we're here at least twice a month on Mercury's Hour to channel the astrology of the day, as well as tarot, divine feminine healing, among other things that come in. And today we're going to kind of break down this big, great conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius that everyone's been talking about, whether they're talking about it as the Star of Bethlehem or the Age of Aquarius. We're going to kind of break down the basics of what it means so that we don't get caught up in a lot of unnecessary references. And we can get down to what it means for you in your own life. So maybe it's best to kind of start off and talk about how this is a 20-year cycle of the planets, Jupiter and Saturn. They occupy the same space as seen from Earth about every 20 years. And on top of that, they have a pattern in the zodiac. So when they're lining up, for about 200 years, they'll have these conjunctions in the signs of the same element. So since 1802, we've been having conjunctions in Earth-based signs. So that's Taurus, Virgo, and Capricorn, with the exception of a brief dip in the early 19th century back into Aries, which it was in fire before. And then in 1981, there was a preview of what we've got to come for the next 200 years in Libra.
And that, yes, the air signs, Libra, Aquarius, Gemini, represent the mind and spirit. And that we have Saturn and Jupiter that are doing this conjunction. And Saturn, again, we talked a little last week, ended last week's podcast, that Saturn represents or is the energy and the archetypal pattern of time, limitation, restriction, discipline, effort, and what limits us, and overcoming what limits us in order to grow. That if you want your garden to flourish and grow, you need to water it, you need to plant it in the right soil, it needs the right elements and the right nutrients and the right tending to be able to actually grow. You can't just wish it to grow or hope that it grows all year long because you always want expansion. It has to go through the cycles of death. And Saturn represents the limitations and the restrictions and the tending. And then Jupiter is kind of the opposite of that. Jupiter is whatever Jupiter touches expands and grows and is just endlessly moving outward and getting bigger, and is buoyant and optimistic.
Yeah, and it's, it endows dignity to things. It's often seen as like the great source of luck within the chart. So
yes, luck and auspiciousness.
Yeah, along with Venus, which is the other kind of smaller benefic planet. So these two coming together represent kind of a contrast. But a contrast that helps to create kind of like how contrast in a picture helps us to see and define the picture. They really bring things into life and into focus, but it's, very dynamic, and it can be not the easiest energy to deal with, but it is very fulfilling and life-changing.
I like, Matt, how you said a few podcasts ago, or maybe one that we never even posted, I can't remember, but that this conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn together is expansion through limitation, which I just want to share so you can, in helping you to understand, you being who's watching, how in my own life, this has been true with, I have an autoimmune disease that I keep in remission through being on an autoimmune paleo diet. It's incredibly restrictive. I eat the same foods. I had to give up all the yummy foods, all the Jupiter, like on its own without Saturn, all the yummy, delicious, like I eat like 12 foods over and over. This is my 3rd year on it. And it's incredible restriction on all levels because I love food. But through this restriction and my discipline and my dedication to this diet, the disease is in remission.
Yay.
And that's the expansion, right? So that's the expansion, that my health is on point by restricting and being on this diet. So that's a really good personal example of Jupiter and Saturn coming together in that contrast, that high contrast of extreme restriction creating extreme growth.
Right. Yeah.
And then real quick, I just also want to share what I always repeat over and over too, is the line that Jack White Stripes lead singer.
Jack White. Yeah.
Said, and I think it was a documentary on them, that limitation breeds creativity. Which I think is another great line for Jupiter and Saturn coming together.
Yeah, and it's one of those lessons that I had to learn as a poet, is that, poetry is not just kind of just verbally spilling whatever is on your mind, but that it requires a discipline of coming to and being present and giving shape to and kind of holding yourself back in very specific ways, to be able to start to see a self kind of coming through and a voice kind of coming through the work.
That reminds me too, with poetry, for the self, the presence, the essence to come through. It really is a lot about hedging and cropping. It's like getting down to the essence with a poem, it's like really, what are the words that are the essence, and how can I show and not tell, which is, another great example of Jupiter and Saturn together. And then if we think about that, we've brought like an example of health, an example of creative expression, and then thinking that it's Jupiter and Saturn in Aquarius. So Aquarius. And I just want to say about Aquarius, I always like to start this off, is everyone always says Aquarius is about the group.
Right.
But that's like half the story. Aquarius is about your own individuation. It honors the individual. There's a lot of distaste about individualism in current culture, but that's really talking about the shadow of individualism, the self-centered, me only shadow, whereas Aquarius represents the true essence, that we all have a soul or an authentic self. And oftentimes all or much of the true self is shadowed and pushed down away from the ego identification because of our upbringing, because it's not safe to be the true self. Culture tells us to be other things. Family molds us to be other things, whatever it is, fear, ignorance, blah, blah, blah. So that Aquarius represents being that true self, discovering that true self, and then bringing that true self to the group and forming groups around a bunch of true selves.
Right.
That the groups, it is about the group, but the group as everyone's in their authenticity coming together, not coming together in pack mentality.
Right. Yeah, the pack mentality is kind of, as we were talking about dogma being the shadow of Sagittarius, or where Sagittarius energy gets kind of derailed and run off the track, so to speak. That's kind of what we get with Aquarius, where Aquarius is about learning your your personal limits, like what's the limit between myself and the group? How do I have to make choices, kind of following the Saturn principle? And as we were saying last week about Jupiter ruling Sagittarius, in the ancient tradition, like Saturn rules Aquarius. And so there's this, like, how do I take on limitations on the self, uh, in order to participate, and join into group life, but not lose myself in it? Because that's the shadow of Aquarius, is just totally losing the self in the group.
That's interesting because I see that so much more as, and here's a great example of how subjective astrology can be, because I don't see that as Aquarius shadow. I see that more as Pisces shadow, losing the self in the group. I see more like the shadow of Aquarius being isolating, like you're not in your authentic self, you're just isolating yourself
The
from the group.
loner.
The loner, the mad scientist in the basement, the crazy guy in the basement, just really rebellious for rebellion's sake. And this makes me think a lot of Uranus, which is the new ruler of Aquarius. So they both rule Aquarius, ancient
Right.
and modern, and that the shadow of Uranus is more the wacky, weirdo, eccentric that rebels for rebellion's sake and will not join the group at all,
Right.
and is rebellious on purpose just to push buttons. But I can see what you're saying, even though I tend to think of that more as Pisces, as where Saturn is Aquarius's ruler, that
Hmm.
losing, not being true self and just going along with the group mentality being the shadow of Aquarius. I can see that. That makes sense to me when I think about the old ancient ruler, the Saturn ruling Aquarius. That can be
Yeah.
that too. And when I
And
think about the when I think about the Aquariuses, I know I can see both of those shadows. I can see just being part of the pack mentality as a
mhm.
shadow and not really having your own unique individuated self expressed within the group. And I can see the, the isolation.
Yeah, and Aquarius kind of speaks to, in some ways, the need to uh, have kind of common ground rules within our groups,
Right.
so that
It's
we,
about the universal.
yeah, so that we can operate in good faith. And this is why you get things associated with the sign of Aquarius, like science, and the scientific method, because it's about uh, taking on these kind of arbitrary means of objectification, but doing it as a means to be able to have somewhat of a universal language, with which we
Yeah.
can talk. And that can also kind of get out of control too, where it's like that gets used as a billy club to beat people into submission.
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean because Aquarius is a fixed sign, along
mhm.
with Taurus, Leo, and Scorpio can become too rigid. Fixed signs can become too rigid. It's like science only. If the five senses can't prove it, it's meaningless. And also just the point that not only fixed, but yeah, Aquarius rules the mind
Mhm.
and it rules technology,
Mhm.
alien contact, science, science
Yeah.
fiction, right? All of that innovation is a main word of Aquarius. It How can we innovate? How can we innovate the medical industry? How can we innovate institutions? How can we look at it in a new way in the mind and improve it?
Right.
And Aquarius ruling technology too, that has a lot to say about this, like just thinking about the conjunction on a collective level, this Aquarius Saturn conjunction.
Right. And we might think about kind of, uh, like the last time Saturn went through Aquarius, which would have been 91 to 93.
Mm-hmm.
uh, we see things happening like the first web browser uh, came out, and we start getting this move towards like the internet and this kind of disembodied space that we're all now starting to inhabit. And especially when Saturn took its first dip into Aquarius in March, we were all kind of pushed onto these platforms like Zoom and the telehealth and everything. And so there's this heavy emphasis in Aquarius to kind of uh, take these leaps outside of the body and into this kind of almost telepathic connection.
Yeah, I want to expand on that, but I just real quick want to go back to when you said Saturn was in Aquarius 91 and 93. So that's also a good time for everyone to think back
Right.
to those years and what you were going through for your personal life. And then, yeah, collectively, I like how you say the disembodied space, that Aquarius, the self can extend beyond the body, just like it will with Pisces. The sign after that extends beyond the body once it leaves Capricorn, or even, anyway, I'm not going to diatribe. Extending beyond the body into Zoom, into technology, social media, and also to add to that, when Saturn went into 0 degrees Aquarius in March with COVID, kicking it off with COVID, the dual nature of being forced into isolation, which I feel, coming from the healer perspective I connect to, that is an invitation for people to find their true self, to pull away from just always being out and about, connecting with other people, and to go within and to find the self. And then also connecting through technology. I mean, imagine if we were going through this before the internet.
Right.
And you could say good and bad things about that. I mean, on one hand, if we didn't have video, and I think about my father not being able to connect with my 84-year-old father on video, I would be heartbroken.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we would all be suffering a lot more without the electronic communication.
Yeah, and also when I think about, because I'm by myself with no pets, no partner, so the screen is a vital force for me. And I have Aquarius rising. Matt has Aquarius moon, so we both have Aquarius in us. So people with Aquarius in them tend to not be technology rejectors or haters. So you can check in with that. But for me, I love the internet. I love technology. I do video telehealth, and I don't feel any disconnect from doing telehealth. I don't feel like I connect any less with my clients. In fact, in many ways, I like it a lot better, because I feel like I'm in my own home, they're in their own home. There's an intimacy to that. And then there's a slight energetic different separation. But I don't mind that. And I don't feel any less empathically connected. So for me, and I know we're all different, so I'm not putting this on anyone, but for me, I can empathically connect at a distance through the screen, across the world. I don't need to be in the same physical space. And I feel that way about the people that I love too. I feel like I can easily connect to the people I love, whether I physically connect with them or not. And this is all very Aquarius, because Aquarius is beyond the body.
Yeah. Yeah. In some ways, it reminds us that what the limitation of physical distance is not that limiting.
Yeah.
It allows us to see through space,
Yeah.
see through that kind of hardened element of Earth, and to be able, like air, to kind of escape those confines and find a new way to connect.
Yeah. That's like the innovating, right? It's innovating intimacy, innovating connection, innovating what it means to be a self, that it can be beyond the physicality, beyond the body. Of course, in shadow, this can go to dangerous places and we can turn into bots that are like, lose our humanity. I mean, there's always the shadow, but I think it's really refreshing too to talk about the light side of technology and alien contact or aliens too. That's very Aquarian as well. Like, again, moving beyond, right? Aquarius is so much about evolving and moving beyond what is known.
Well, and even at the beginning of the pandemic, just for those who were able to work from home, just being able to work from home a little bit more, uh, like it just it took away some of the restrictions in some sense. Although as long as it went on, you do feel a bit of the isolation end of it, but still, it's like it's freeing to not have to be tied to commuting in on a train or on a bus or in your car to an office. And it's nice to be at home and still be at work. So not letting those spaces collapse a little bit can
And
be
again, just to bring it back
right.
around, it's like expansion through restriction, through
Hmm.
not being able to go to work or out to places, etc. Through COVID, through the restriction of COVID, we are learning about how to innovate and expand beyond what we saw as these necessary physical ways of being in the world.
Right. The way the world works, as everyone will always tell you when they want you to do something. It's just the way the world works. And then when you get
Right.
to these moments of crisis and these kind of Aquarian moments, it's like, no, the world doesn't have to work that way.
I mean,
It can work
essentially,
differently.
yeah, essentially Aquarius is the push of evolution. It pushes you out. And then it's thinking about Aquarius ruled by Uranus too,
Hmm.
and the Tower card in the tarot deck, which crumbles apart the old system and the status quo in order to bring the new. And that's what I feel very strongly about this conjunction, that is, a 20-year and then a 300-year, these big longer cycles, but that it's initiating the crumbling of an old mindset, an old way of seeing this is what self is, this is what human life looks like.
Right. Yeah, no, it's like we go through this cycle from the beginning of an idea, and we can think of that as like air element, to uh, having the inspiration kind of move it along, and that's where we get kind of fire added to that. And then having to bring that into and process through the emotions in order to get to this point of manifestation. And so we can look back over the last 200 years and see like how drastically human society has changed. And now we're at this place where we can reshape that, rethink it, get to a new idea. That's kind of the blessing of what this cycle has for us. It's a new story we get to write.
It's a new story we get to write. And I just want to make a little commentary here toward the collective on that, in that, as the Capricorn energy that we've been in with Pluto, which still has
Hmm.
a little ways to go in Capricorn, and Saturn, who's been best friends with Pluto for a while. And there's been this whole dismantling of the toxic patriarchy, and we don't want this anymore. But there's also other ideas that all go along with that are very black and white ideas, or like black and white, like capitalism bad, socialism good,
Right.
individualism bad, collectivism good, or like that these isms are the only structures that exist. And that not only are they the only structures that exist, these isms, but they're either bad or good. Aquarius is going to come in and say, there's other isms, there's other
Right.
structures you haven't even thought of. And also, it's not about bad or good.
Right.
That
Good or bad is just
and
a
then,
binary that
well,
you kind of
it's
go
just
through.
binary. And then, what Aquarius is saying is that when you're coming from the authentic self, you don't need the binary. You
Right.
don't need to default into good or bad, that you can see things more contextually. Now, of course, I always want to disclaim, we're not talking about the big hatred things. Like, that's not under contextual change,
Right.
right? Hatred towards any of the kinds of people. It is black and white. It is like racism is very bad and very unhealthy, and all people are equal, created equal. You know, there's some things that are
Right. Well, and
axioms.
those things are created out of those really awful black and white type distinctions. Thinking that
Right.
I'm good and this person's bad
Right. I
based on
mean, all of
some.
the hatred isms birth out of black and white thinking to begin with, right? It's like
Yeah.
the toxic mindset is born out of a toxic heart, born out of, I mean, that's a whole other, again, we're not going to diatribe. We're sticking with, because we love to diatribe.
We'll have plenty of time to talk about Pluto later.
Yeah. We always want to go back to Pluto, but
Well, it is big astrology, but we've got time for that.
it's so big. But yeah, it's just what's exciting is this Aquarius energy that does come in. It's coming in through Saturn, through restriction, and through Jupiter expansion, and saying, can we have new isms? Can we have new belief structures? Can we transcend bad and good? Can we transcend physical space? Can we transcend the body? Like, can we open our mind to connect in new ways, to think about structures and institutions and isms in new ways? It's really about the new. Aquarius is about the future.
Mm-hmm.
It's future, future, future.
Yeah, there was a line I always loved, and regardless of the source text, but from Karl Marx, where he talks about what happens when societies kind of fall apart and rebuild. Is that he's like, you get to this point where all that is solid melts into air. And it's always kind of stuck
Beautiful
with me.
line.
It's a very
Very
visceral kind
poetic.
of feeling. And I feel like that's kind of where we're at right now, is that everything that felt really solid and unmovable uh, is, is less stable. And that's, on one hand, it can create an amount of fear, but on the other hand can also create a fair amount of hope, that because some of these things were oppressive and were not helpful to a lot of people,
And
some of those being those isms that we were talking about, the racism and
well, and all the
patriarchy.
I mean, the isms rule our life. It rules every institution, is a
Mm-hmm.
belief structure, right? So Aquarius wants to blast all of these belief structures, and it tends to blast, and that's terrifying. And let's get
Mm-hmm.
real. Life has been scary and is going to continue to be scary. I mean, and I don't want to be super dramatic, but it's pretty dramatic when you look back on this year, and
Mm-hmm.
that we know that this is going to continue. There's no going backward. We're only going forward at this point. So
Right.
this Aquarius Jupiter Saturn conjunction in your personal life and in the collective life is saying you need to think in new ways. You need to rise to the adaptive challenges and think in new ways altogether. Get out of these binary, either it's, utopia or it's despair, either
Mm-hmm.
it's radical or it's conservative, either you're this or you're that. It's like when you really find your authentic self or feel that authentic essence, whatever you want to call it, you can call it the soul, you can call it essence, you can call it true self. It's complex. It's not just
Mm-hmm.
like one thing. It's not just this one dimensional thing. There's many aspects. Life has many aspects, which we see reflected in nature.
Mm-hmm.
Astrology is nature. Life is nature. Spirit is nature. And we see that there is something we can rely upon always, which is where I find comfort. And that's the cyclicalness of nature,
Right.
right? This is the crone medicine that we know, in like, as the crone knows that everything is, rise and fall, black and white, death and rebirth, like, and this too shall pass. And
Mm-hmm.
that we can fall, do a trust fall into the cycles of nature, because we are our nature and we're connected at all times.
Right.
and we can, you know, it's only scary, or it's only too scary if we're trying to hold on to what
Right.
was.
And I hear the bell, so that means that we wanted to transition, you know, kind of
We're
because
gonna do cards.
we can keep going round and round talking about the fear that Saturn element and the Jupiter hope that kind of combat with each other a little bit, but they bring us to some place. And what we want to do is to kind of get a message about what that place is, and that we
We're gonna,
find
yeah,
that
use the cards.
use the cards. They're usually one of the best tools that I have personally. The astrology is great, and it does take a long time to kind of sit with and work with the cycles. But the tarot can kind of in an instant pull you out of
Out of
space and show
analysis,
you,
yeah,
yeah.
out of analysis into essence. Matt,
Okay.
you pick.
Yeah, let's go with the archetype cards there, the round ones.
Okay, so the archetype deck. We're going to use the archetype deck. So I'm going to read from the book because her
Kim Krans.
Kim Krans,
Or Krans, yes, sorry.
who does the Wild Unknown Tarot, which everyone loves. She does this archetype deck, which everyone loves. My clients love this deck. I love this deck.
It's
Matt loves this
beautiful.
deck.
Yeah.
And I like to read from here because her writing is really poetic and beautiful. So let's get out of analysis into the essence. Matt and I do this all the time. I do this in my practice, that when we look at a transit or dream or anything that where you'd want to immediately go into analysis, it's like, let's not analyze it. Let's just pull and find out what it is.
Right, because that's when you start to see these coincidences that just bubble up out of nowhere, and give you a lot of what the meaning would be. It's your unconscious kind of talking to you.
So the unconscious is talking to us now, and I'm going to pull 3 cards for what the Jupiter, Saturn, and Aquarius conjunction means. We'll see what we get. I feel such a bubbling of energy right now with this, like the champagne bubbles are effervescent. Oh, I actually ended up pulling 4 cards. Okay. All right. I'm definitely feeling Uranus because the 4th card fell on the floor. Here we go.
It's
All right.
trying
So
to get away.
we have the creator, the thread,
Yes.
the gem, and the mirror.
Okay.
So let's start with the creator. XX. The art, I'm going to hold, there we go. So that way we can, the artist, the alchemist, the innovator, the creator, the first archetype in the trio of existence, is not intimidated by darkness or by lack. They know that from the void, creation inevitably emerges. With meager, minimal, and outlandish materials, the creator reveals a new image. They make the empty room resonate with healing sounds. They generate bounty from the seed that others tossed away. Though generative, this archetype annihilates preconceived notions of what is possible. Hello, Aquarius, right?
Yes. Very Aquarian. Yeah.
Leaving unexpected openings in the wake of its destruction. The creator does this first, being absolutely present to what is. That reminds me of what you're talking about with poetry.
Mm-hmm.
Not imagining or wishing things were different. Hello, 220.
Right.
I'm like making commentary every 2 seconds.
Yeah, and Saturn too. That's a very Saturn principle.
Very Saturn principle, reality, what is. And second, trusting that a force greater than themselves awaits constant collaboration with each human soul, right? That's what we can do the trust fall with. Whether we call it nature, God, goddess, Shakti, or divinity, it remains nameless. It is the creator's lifelong companion. When light, curious, playful, open, and surprising, when dark, loses spark, feels burdened. Well, that's everything we just said. So I feel like let's read them all and then see what time we have left, because there's a lot to read.
Right.
This definitely, the creator definitely describes what we just talked about pretty spot on.
Yeah, and about being open to spontaneity in particular, like letting the reality be what the reality is, and not what you want to tell everyone it is or what you want to think it is because it makes you feel comfortable, but just sitting with it.
There's no creativity in the comfort zone.
Mm-hmm.
So then we have the thread, the path, the vein, the circuit. Life is a tangle. So much happens simultaneously and circuitously, leaving us grappling for meaning and direction in a network of distractions. When we connect to the energy of the thread, however, we strike the deepest vein in the body. Our whole being responds to its tug. Meaning is pumped through our bloodstream. Our mind and spirits are lifted. We remember who we are and what we came into this world to do. Again, very Aquarius, connecting with your true calling, true soul. Though this happens on the most profound level, it could be the simplest incident that activates the thread. A song, an image, a conversation heard in passing. No matter how confusing and multi-layered our modern lives become, if we are connected to the thread, we are free. Being tethered to it is the only anchor our heart requires. When light, the circuit of meaning within chaos. When dark, binding, frustrating, and taut. Well, that just adds to the tale of this, doesn't it? Right? As we become new, connecting to the transpersonal, whatever you want to call it, and connecting to the true self.
Yeah.
That's the thread.
Yeah, and it's that it represents that place where whenever you're in a hard spot and you say to yourself like, uh, I don't know how to get out of this. I don't know where to look. I don't, and then there's that one little thing that gives you an insight into where to go, and you kind of follow it without really, it doesn't really make a lot of logical sense, but then you follow it, and then it leads you to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. That's the thread kind of pulling you along. It's the
Yeah.
intuition kind of connecting you, but with your unconscious and kind of guiding you through kind of a labyrinth or of sorrows or hardships or whatnot.
I mean, it really speaks to the self beyond the body, that when these synchronicities come along and these connections come along, it's the self outside of the body mirroring back to the self and keeping you on that path of purpose, on that deeper path of truth. And that all of the feelings, it's another thing I feel like I'm always chirping, is building resilience around feelings that, they're just chemical storms. Sorrow is
Mhm.
just sorrow. It's just a chemical storm. It's nothing more than that. We're not our feelings.
Right.
And that they're going to course through fear, sorrow, disappointment, shock. And yet, if we fall back into the transpersonal, cultivate our relationship with the transpersonal through practice, through spiritual practice or
Mhm.
nature practice, or whatever you want to call it, and then we cultivate our true self or that authentic essence through these synchronicities and occurrences, that's what this conjunction is about.
Yeah, it's a great exercise to always, on a regular basis, do something in which you're unfamiliar, something that pulls you out of your comfort zone, something that pulls you out of your habits, so that you can start to recognize those ways that the universe is kind of tugging you along.
And, you know, to say, Matt, with that sentiment, I don't think any of us have to try anymore. I think it's happening now.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
COVID
it
has
is.
pulled us out, and it's not going to stop with that. We're going to have a series of things happening. These are transpersonal energies that we're talking about here. So it's just going to start happening. What this is already saying is that the familiar and the comfortable is no more. And so this is how to get anchored, rooted, and connected, and to understand that this is a grand adventure and a quest.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that there's an element of privilege and luxury to that if you can't feed yourself and shelter yourself, none of this is going to speak to you. And I
Right.
just want to just say that out loud and honor that too, because Maslow's hierarchy of needs
Mm-hmm.
exists. Okay. So, and that's real.
Yeah.
Okay. So next we have the gem.
Mm-hmm.
The diamond, the gold, the inner treasure. There are infinite names for the gem. It is also known as the jewel, the star, the talent, the gift, the gold. One thing for certain is that it is found deep within a substance that is very much unlike it. For example, a diamond in the rough. The gem always stands in contrast to its surroundings. You can't find it when you are among comforts and pleasantries. Again, that theme continues.
Yep.
Precious stones develop slowly deep in the earth amid pressure and darkness. Discovering the gem requires a descent beneath the surface where there is no definitive map. Yet the longing to touch the true gem within us is so strong that we cannot help but seek out its radiance. Your gem, like your destiny, is unlike any other in the entire world. Keep digging. When light, unique, shining, generative, irreplaceable, and when dark, envy, greed, and grasping. It's like the
Yeah.
same theme said 3 different ways so far, isn't it?
Except, yeah, in some ways, it's all saying kind of accept where you are, accept what this is, the gift of it in a way, that even though everything is falling around you or around all of us, it is falling around all of us. That's probably part of what the gift is that it's putting us all into this collective space, so that we see that we need each other as much as we need ourselves.
Or that we need ourselves as much as we need each other.
Yeah, and vice versa.
And
Yeah.
vice versa. And when it's needing yourself, it's not the self-centered self, it's the true self, the gem, your gifts, your talents, and how you can, in your own true essence, contribute to the group. Not trying to be something you're not trying to be a social warrior when you're more of a healer, or trying to be a healer when you're more of a builder, or trying to be a builder when you're more of a nurturer. That, you know, the gem is your particular talent. Also, that the only way to bring out that calling is to go through the pressure,
Mm-hmm.
the crumbling and the pressure and the uncertainty are all what's molding us, are
Right.
all what's bringing that out for each other, for the new. All right, pretty profound. And then we end with the mirror. The reflection, the illusion, the looking glass. We look into mirrors every day without recognizing them as portals into another realm. They can shatter, flatter, distort, reflect, and project an image back to us that we deem to be true. The energy of the mirror is all about self-perception. When the archetype of the mirror appears, we are in the mythic land of Narcissus, who saw himself reflected in a pool and fell in love with his own image. So compelled by his reflection, he could not turn away, a fixation that eventually led to his death. Recognize the power and danger of the mirror. It is a construct, one that may drive a shard between you and your true self. The mirror contains trickster energy. Put the phone down, stop with the comparisons, and let the mirror stand empty for a while. Rest with the one inside.
Mm-hmm.
When light, witnessing the deeper self, pure awareness. When dark, narcissism, comparison, harsh edges. Well, and that just is like everything as well, right? Like the authentic self.
Yeah. And it's, recognizing that, when I'm irritated with somebody else, I'm irritated with myself, that there's a
Yes.
mirroring back to me. So that it's taking that. I mean, if we want to put it in the context of what we've been talking about, it's that taking the freedom of that Aquarian energy to step back, to let the other person be whatever they are, and to go inward to look at what inside of me is causing the irritation, what inside of me is causing the anger or the agitation.
Yeah, and that is very true, and it very much speaks to doing your shadow work, to looking into your own shadow, your own unseen parts of yourself, to see what's hidden there, and because the true self is in your shadow along with a lot of other parts and aspects of self. So it's like a call to do the inner work, a call to see the external as a mirror to help you look inward, to take responsibility and do that shadow work. And also to, I mean, again, it's like if we do the shadow work and we bring out the true essence of who we are, and then we come together, holy crap. I just imagine
Yeah.
that being like where we can really create new versions, new innovative versions in your personal life and in the collective. Think about personal relationships. Think about a romantic relationship of two authentic selves having a conversation versus
Hmm.
two egos that are projecting unconsciously their mom and dad onto each other. It's so different. It's
Right.
so different when our institutions on some level, unconscious, deep level, are mirroring the abusive family upbringing, when our romantic relationships are mirroring what we didn't get as children, when it's just like the kaleidoscope of shadows versus, and that's the another way to look at Aquarius is it's autonomy.
Hmm.
Aquarius is autonomy. It's like, this is who I am. And Aquarian energy and Aquarian on any level has like a bubble around it. It's like, I'm not going to I don't need to bleed into you, and I don't need you to bleed into me. And that speaks
Right.
to the age of Pisces going into the age of Aquarius, that 2000-year cycle that we're moving into the age of Aquarius, where it's about the individual being independent. Again, not toxically, not the toxic, self-centered, pull yourself up by the bootstraps and conquer version. That's crap. But,
Right.
I am a whole being. I have awareness. I'm in touch with my authentic self, and I bring myself into all relationships interdependently.
Right. I can engage with my limitations, without succumbing to them, and through that I can.
What do you
Uh,
mean by that, Matt? That line
uh,
is not
well, what
like,
I
give me
mean
an
is,
example.
that I don't necessarily need to feel every uh, limitation as though it's crushing on me personally, or that it's a personal thing.
Can you
Uh,
give me an example though? Because I'm still just those, it's not landing in me. Like a
well,
distinct example. Like, what's a limitation?
yeah. I mean, well, one of the things that um, so when someone asks me for uh, clarification or an example when I'm talking, and I kind of, I'm not communicating with them. I don't like take it personally as though they're like they have a beef with me, but that I respect the fact that there's a limitation between the way in which we're communicating, and that I can honor that and then kind of back up and, well, like what you're asking now is to give an example.
I know, like, yeah, I'm asking for an example. So what's the limitation? I think I'm getting tripped up on the vocab.
Well,
Like,
it's part of communication. It's like not everything that comes out of my mouth is going to translate to somebody else. So
so
then
the
I have to
limitation.
take the limitation of I have to reshape it. I have to come back, and I don't
Oh,
take
I
it
see. So,
personally.
okay, so the
Uh,
limitation is me not understanding what you're saying.
right,
Okay, and so then if you don't take that limitation personally, like, oh, I'm a terrible communicator, or oh, Michelle is so dominating and mean,
right,
if you don't take it personally, which would be shadow stuff, but you just take it for what it is, like, oh, we're having a communication gap, then
right.
you can face it like an adaptive challenge. Oh, let me try explaining it another way and see if we get through to each other.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, I get it now. So when we are connected to our true self, when we do our work, when
Right.
we do our work, that's when we stop taking everyone and everything so personally, that if anyone ever, when people, our loved ones, say to us, uh, this hurts me, or I don't
Hmm.
understand this, or I have a need that's not getting met, we're not like, oh, that means I'm bad, or that means you're bad. When we do
Right.
our work, we can stop doing that. We can stop saying, you're bad, you outside of me, or I'm bad, me inside of me. That
Hmm.
goes away. That all goes away because it is a mental construct to say, I'm bad, you're bad. And instead, to have this sense of zoomed out neutrality that's like, oh, this isn't working.
Hmm.
How I am and how you are not in harmony, are not connecting. How can we connect? Let's see, what can I do? What can you do? And we can look at it more constructively, and we can still share feelings, right? Like, oh,
Right.
sad that blah, 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 but it doesn't have to be this judgment call.
Right. And we can, and then we can also more healthily accept when certain things don't work out,
Right.
that we can try it again a different way. Um,
Mm.
and, we can do it better the next time. There's, failure can give us so many insights into the condition that we're in and what we're working through.
Yeah,
And it can be
failure
a
is such a
blessing.
great indicator of a need for innovation or
Hmm.
adapting in a new way. And again, it's like Aquarius really does have that ability to not take things personally and to not judge self or other. And that's what we're seeing rampant in society because it's rampant in the self,
Right.
because there's so many untreated people who haven't done enough, and just enough. You don't have to be the shiny, bright, shiny star of healedness. You know, you don't have to be like a bright, shiny star unless you want to be. It's just doing your work enough to not go, you're bad, I'm bad,
Right.
to not feel crushed, like you say, to not feel like you're this terrible person when you can't show up, or they're terrible when they can't show up. It's which then gives space, because as soon as you go, you're terrible, I'm terrible, that's that karmic hook,
Right.
sticky. It's like giving responsibility to somebody that shouldn't have it, or taking responsibility that isn't yours,
Right.
which is the
Yeah.
age of Pisces, the past 2000 years, where it's like no boundaries, everything's bleeding.
Yeah. Everything becomes one thing. Yeah.
Everyone's bleeding into everyone, and then we're thinking somebody's going to save us, right? The savior. And Age of
Yeah.
Aquarius is like, you're going to all first save yourselves, or not
Hmm.
first, it's not linear, but save yourselves in order to save each other in order to save yourselves,
Right.
happening simultaneously.
Yeah. And recognizing that we're all kind of a part of this whole consciousness thing, that literally when you see something in somebody else, you are seeing it in yourself, because they're a part of you at a grander level, more meta level.
Yes, and Matt, I just realized I didn't set the timer for the second half.
Oh, I think we're right about at
I'm
time.
terrible.
So that's okay.
You're
That's
terrible.
okay. It got us through. It got us through an interesting point there at the end. So,
It did, and it's actually, I think we might be at exactly the hour. I think I might have intuitively looked over because it's
I
2:50.
think I think we are just about at the hour. Yeah. So
Yeah, so we can wrap it up in saying that it seems that from what we've pulled in our discussion and riffing in the sacred synchronistic flow here, that this Jupiter Saturn Aquarius conjunction is about the old ways crumbling for the new innovative ways birthing, and being able to connect to true self within that and do the trust fall, connect to the transpersonal, find your true path within it, your true self, do your inner work so that we can all
right.
create enough space between each other to engage in these adaptive challenges so we can transcend beyond the you're bad, I'm bad.
Right. Yeah, we don't necessarily need the structures we've had. They might be going away. We have each other, and that's the important thing. And that if we can go inside and do our own work and recognize, what's in us is kind of also what's in others and what we're receiving from others, that uh, we can learn to value and love each other and find our way through this murky period.
Yeah, and be able to work together in a lot more harmony
Yeah.
instead of constantly feeling bad or feeling other people are bad. So it really does start with that inner work. And if we again just think about the 20 years, the smallest cycle of this is 20 years. So it's like for 20 years, this is the work,
Yeah.
is to unstick from each other. And so just, and I just want to say that, and that with, because a lot of I think there's a lot of hype that like this alignment, all of a sudden it's going to be like this cathartic, grand, big deal. And it's not.
Yeah. I mean, we're not, yeah. I hear the Age of Aquarius, that old kind of, almost like the Christian 1,000-year reign of Christ or something, that it's somehow it's going to be all like peace and love and roses, and the planets just will make it poof happen. It's like, well, it involves us, like the planet's working through us, and we have to accept that energy and work with it and kind of flow with it to get to somewhere better. And it's probably not going to be, uh,
Immediate.
yeah, or some uh, boundaryless paradise.
Right. Matt and I end this show very Saturn ruling Aquarius reality. We have to make it better. It's our inner work that leads to the outer work, and it takes time and dedication. There's going to be no instantaneous anything, and it's not going to be some utopia. It's going to continue to be cyclical as nature is, but nature will be giving us the breakdown. So mote it be.
Yeah, so mote it be. And with that, we'll wrap it up, and we'll be back again at another Mercury's Hour with more of what's to come in 2021 and beyond. So, drop us a note in the comments. Also, if you want to find the audio for our podcast, we're now up on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google and Stitcher. So you can find us in lots of different places. And check out our websites if you'd like to book consultations. Drop us an email at priestessmercurypodcast@gmail.com. Until then, we'll see you on another Mercury's Hour.